Evagrius Ponticus on thoughts, learning to recognize the battle within. One of the greatest contributions of Evagrius Ponticus to Christian spirituality was his insight that the spiritual life is largely a battle over thoughts. This is long before cognitive psychology or looking at cognitive patterns of thought. This is the 4th century. And Evagrius was a desert monk who came to these insights through years and years of solitude in the desert. Evagrius carefully observed how thoughts shape emotions, desires, and ultimately actions. And his teaching is incredibly practical. So the basic principle goes like this. Evagrius distinguished between a thought arising and our response to it. A thought itself is not a sin. It's an invitation. And what matters is whether we entertain it, believe it, and allow it to become part of us. He famously taught, quote, "You cannot prevent the birds from flying over your head, but you can prevent them from building a nest in your hair," unquote. This saying is often attributed to later writers, but it captures the teaching of Evagrius well. Every human being experiences thousands of thoughts each day, and the spiritual question is not, what am I thinking? The question is, which thoughts deserve my attention? There are 4 stages of temptation for Evagrius. He observed a progression. The first stage is suggestion. A thought simply appears. An example would be, no one appreciates me, or I deserve better, or just look one more time, or God has forgotten you. Now this stage is morally neutral. Jesus himself experienced suggestions in the wilderness. 2, conversation. Instead of letting the thought pass, we begin talking with it. What if that's true? Maybe they really don't like me. I wonder if I should, and so on and so forth. This is where imagination begins feeding the thought. Step 3, the heart agrees. The thought now feels like my thought rather than something merely presented to me. And at this point, desire begins directing my will. And the 4th stage is captivity, which is repeated consent forming habits. Eventually, the thought becomes automatic. It no longer feels like temptation. It simply feels like me. This is what the scripture often calls being enslaved. And so Evagrius came up with an idea called the 8 logismoi. And that's a Greek word for thoughts, the 8 thoughts. And these thoughts are the precursors of what the Roman Catholics later came up with, the 7 deadly sins. But this is the basis of those. And I would suggest that his perception on it is much deeper than anything that's come out related to the church after that. Evagrius identified 8 recurring categories of destructive thoughts, logismoi. These became the foundation, as I said, for the 7 deadly sins, and they're not actions. They're not merely actions. They are habitual patterns of thinking. The first is gluttony, living from appetite. I need this to feel okay. That's what the thought looks like. I need this to feel okay. I need this hamburger to feel okay. I need this drink to feel okay. I need one more drink to feel okay, and so on. And so today we could call it emotional eating, compulsive consumption, constant stimulation. Those are all types of gluttony. The second kind of thought is called lust, and it's reducing persons to objects of desire. Not merely sexual behavior. It begins by allowing the imagination to possess another person. The third kind of thought is greed, the illusion that security comes through possessing more. If I only had that car, if I only lived in this area, if I only made as much as my friend who works at the bank, and so on. Enough never comes. I'll finally relax if I have enough, and if enough never comes, that's a way of suffering that just doesn't end. The fourth kind of thought is sadness. It's not a healthy grief. Sadness, of course, is not a sin, but sadness as an unhealthy grief is rather a self-focused sorrow that continually revisits losses until hope disappears. Anger, another type of thought, often involves rehearsing offenses. You rehearse it in your mind, what somebody's done to you, mentally replaying conversations, creating imaginary arguments, feeding resentment. The sixth one is less understood by modern people. It's called acedia, and perhaps Evagrius' most original insight. It's translated as sloth later on, but it's much deeper than that. Acedia is a spiritual restlessness. Nothing seems to satisfy. Prayer feels empty. One constantly imagines happiness is somewhere else. And today it often appears as like endless scrolling, inability to remain present, chronic boredom, fear of commitment, perpetual distraction. And many modern psychologists would recognize overlapping features with chronic dissatisfaction and just the fragmentation of our attention. The seventh is vainglory, needing admiration, living for reputation, wanting others to notice our spirituality, wanting to be looked up to. Number 8 is pride, trusting oneself more than God, the illusion of complete self-sufficiency. Now, why these thoughts matter? Well, Evagrius believed repeated thoughts slowly become our identity. Attention to these thoughts shapes our desire, and desire shapes habits, and habits shape character, and character shapes destiny. Modern neuroscience would speak of strengthening neural pathways. Well, Evagrius simply called it the formation of the heart. So his primary spiritual practice in giving direction to other monks that came to him and other people that sought his counsel, he said this, which is so helpful: do not fight every thought. Observe it. Name it. Refuse to identify with it. Return attention back to God. This is super important because when we have a thought, so often we think, I thought that. This is my thought. And that is exactly false according to Evagrius, that these thoughts are presented to us. Now he would say by evil spirits. We could say somehow in the supernatural realm, the battle is always going on with our mind, seeking to set up strongholds in our mind. And he dealt with that directly. And he says you must name it and you must refuse to identify with it. Don't say it's your thought. It's a thought that's been presented to you. And then you return your attention upon God. And the Desert Fathers often compared thoughts to strangers knocking at the door. You are not obligated to invite every visitor inside. And so the goal is not emptying the mind. Evagrius has often been misunderstood in this way. His goal was never mental blankness. Rather, he sought what he called purity of heart, apatheia. This does not mean numbness emotionally. It means freedom from being ruled by disordered thoughts and passions. A person still feels anger, desire, grief, and joy. They are simply no longer controlled by them. It's okay to have a feeling, but you're not controlled by them. The biblical foundations for this and his teaching is like in Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart. Romans 12:2 says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. 2 Corinthians 10:5 take every thought captive to Christ. Philippians 4:8, think about these things. James 1:14 through 15, desire conceived gives birth to sin. So the practical application today, suppose someone ignores your text. You send them a text, they ignore it. Immediately a thought might appear, maybe they're upset with me. Yeah, they're upset with me. Now you have choices at that point. Option one, that's my thought. I believe it. I own it. So I replay it. I create stories that go with it. I might even become anxious. I might even act defensively. The thought now is yours. It owns you. Option two, notice the thought presented to you. It's not my thought. You can say, interesting, that's a thought, that's not a fact. I'm going to offer that thought to Christ and wait. Perhaps they were simply busy, and peace returns. You keep fixing your eyes back on Jesus. You don't have to accept the thought that's being presented to you. Now, I've tried this many times, and as someone who has had many years ago dealt with anxiety at a pretty significant level, is that to look at your thoughts and notice them, we do have a kind of a inner kind of gut level reaction, and we almost always respond to it in some way. Either we come to a conclusion in our own minds about what's going on, but we say something or do something in response to it. What Evagrius is saying is there's no cause for that, because this is not your thought until you invite it in. It is not your thought. And I like the image of the fact that he says these are spirits. There's a spirit of gluttony. There's a spirit of anger. There's a spirit of sadness and despondency. There's a spirit of lust. That these are all supernatural events happening, and they'll continue to provide lots of material for us to think about, but we don't have to own them as our own. Only your relationship to the thought changes. Here's a thought, my relation to that thought, I'm not going to take that thought in. It's presented to me, I'm not going to own that. That's not going to be my thought. And you return your attention back to Jesus. As simple as that sounds, you never feel the anxiety of the thought when you do that. It never gets hold of you. It just kind of makes you alert, makes you attentive to it, and then you say, oh, I know what's going on, and then you let it go. So each day, slow down enough to notice your thoughts. Notice them. Number two, ask where this thought is leading me. That's an important question. 3, refuse to identify with every thought that arises. Number 4, replace destructive thoughts with Scripture. Now, Evagrius wrote a whole book on scriptural responses to each kind of thought. Now, it's a little outdated for us because it deals with the thoughts that monks have when they're just eating bread and water and want to eat more, or frustrated with what's happening in their monastery. It's very monk-oriented, so it doesn't really translate to us quite as well. But the point is very relatable, where we continue to replace a destructive thought with a Scripture. Return your attention to the presence of Christ and repeat this throughout the day. That's the 6th point. So number 5 was return your attention to the presence of Christ. 6 was repeat this patiently throughout the day. So it's good to have a list of scriptures that deal with the kinds of thoughts that you usually maybe struggle with. You know what I mean? Where you take a scripture that is a short scripture that deals directly with the kind of thoughts that you can take in. Without even thinking about it, you own that thought. Well, it's good to put a scripture in between you and that thought. It takes the power out of that thought, and it discourages you from taking that in and claiming that as your own thought. So over time doing this, you become less reactive, you become a lot more discerning, and more deeply rooted in God's peace. So the heart of Evagrius' teaching, the battle of the Christian life, he would say, is not first fought in our circumstances, it's fought in our attention. So the battle starts, spiritual battle starts in our attention, what we pay attention to. We cannot always choose which thoughts arrive, but by God's grace, we can choose which thoughts we welcome. And spiritual maturity grows as we learn to recognize destructive patterns and gently refuse them and continually return our minds to Christ. And in that repeated act of resetting our attention onto Christ, our character gradually is transformed by that peace into the image and likeness of Christ.